Hi there. Valentine's Day is here, so why not take your partner to a cinema for a romantic story? As the Chinese Spring Festival movie market hit a record 5.8 billion yuan box office with its homegrown sci-fi blockbuster, The Wandering Earth, scoring at the holiday box office, a prosperous time for the Chinese film market is anticipated. So what is the new trend of consumption in the Chinese film market? Will The Wandering Earth herald a new dawn for China's sci-fi filmmaking? And what is behind the storytelling in filmmaking at home and abroad? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very pleased to have Professor Jin Haina at the Communication University of China in the studio in the first half. We shall have Professor Teng Jimeng, regular film critic with the CGTN, at the second half of our program. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our studio discussion here. Haina, what do you think is the most important issue when we review the success of box office for the homegrown movies?
I think it's both their domestic performance as well as their international performance. We should not only look at the domestic performance, but also look at how they have expressed Chinese culture internationally.
Let's do a case study. Okay. Of course, Wandering Earth deserves credit for being the first of its kind in terms of a sci-fi filming. What's unique about this movie?
I think this film is unique in two aspects. First, domestically, it is the first hard science fiction film in Chinese history. It is not the first Chinese sci-fi film, because in China we have made sci-fi films even in the silent film era. But this film is the first hard science film. Hard science films stresses big budget and science accuracy and spectacular visual effects. That's why it is so important for the development of sci-fi films in Chinese film sector.
Altogether, 8 films from genres such as comedy, animation, fantasy, and sci-fi hit the theaters in China on the first day of the Chinese Lunar New Year.
Yes.
What about the rest?
The rest, I think some of the rest are also quite impressive, especially Crazy Alien, which is another sci-fi film during the Spring Festival season. It is what we call a soft sci-fi film. It combines comedy with sci-fi.
What kind of inspirations have the Chinese investors or storytellers drawn from Hollywood? I mean, these years we have seen so many sci-fi blockbusters from Hollywood depicting the end of the world and escape by people from other countries, and even Tibet was taken as the last place because it's described as the roof of the world. It's the highest place. So it doesn't come as a surprise to see sci-fi stuff. But why do you think we started to copy Hollywood? And are we a good copycat?
No, I think Chinese filmmakers are learning from Hollywood filmmakers, but they are not just simply copy Hollywood films. From these sci-fi films, we can see that some plots are similar to 2001 Space Odyssey, and some things maybe a little bit similar to The Day After Tomorrow. But Chinese filmmakers have brought Chinese elements, especially Chinese culture elements, into their filmmaking.
Thank you so much. When we come back after the short break, we'll be joined by Teng Jimeng, our regular movie critic, to take a closer look at why cultural elements have been featured so prominently in our portrayal of the latest box office success. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are very happy to be joined here by Professor Teng Jimeng. Welcome to our show. Now, obviously, The Wandering Earth is way ahead of all other 7 films which were put on the theater during the Spring Festival period. Wonderful time. Now, is China's first big-budget sci-fi film, The Wandering Earth, a milestone? And in what way do you think it deserves credit for being the first of its kind?
Well, absolutely. I think it is a milestone. It's a profound milestone flick that actually characterized the rise of Chinese cinema in the sci-fi genre. China actually lags behind in sci-fi films before. I mean, even though that history can date back to the 1920s and 30s, and even the 1980s, the early years of reform. But then Chinese sci-fi lags behind in several aspects. For example, plot-wise, it used to be very, very boring and also kind of an everyday life thing without thinking further into the space with these imaginative devices.
Excuse me, but are you proud of the storytelling this time around? What about the narrative?
Yeah, storytelling is my next thing that I'd like to elaborate. And now this time around, we have a hero, but then it's an ensemble of heroes. Unlike Hollywood, it's not that one lone hero, but we have an ensemble of heroes working together and even working with multiple nations, like the Russians in this very film, to overcome this very mega catalysm. In this sense, I think that plot-wise, we are now triumphing. And secondly, in terms of special effect, China is also quickly catching up. The huge and stunning special effect that we see in the film, it's so very outstanding. I mean, never before have people seen things like this. And even my Hollywood counterpart, even this New York Times reporter, reports this very stunning special effects that measure against the Hollywood standards. And lastly, I think that the Chinese cultural element stands out quite a bit. I mean, once again, it's not a lone ranger, not a lone hero, dying, reborn, but then he's a hero working with a couple of hundred heroes.
The Wandering Earth deserves credit for many reasons. However, those who hold the counter-argument say, look, China is always known for boasting of a first-class hardware, but what about the people, actors and actresses? Do you think they have been seriously reduced in terms of the quality of their performance? We talked about this earlier in the first part of the story. Can you elaborate a bit more about the vulnerabilities of the Wandering Earth?
Yes, there's two important flaws of Wandering Earth. First, the acting, because a lot of the budget goes to the special effect, and this film did not have very professional actors and actresses. Most, including the director, he only directed one film before. So, in terms of plot, a lot of the plot is facilitated by words, by shouting. If earthquake happened, someone will say, earthquake happened. If it happened again, and says, oh, it's second earthquake. So it's not by acting, just by a lot of words and shouting. So overall, this film feels a little bit noisy, feels a bit all over.
I'm afraid Hannah put her finger on a very controversial point concerning the weakness or advantages of the Wandering Earth. For example, the budget. Now, if the budget if most of the budget finds its way to the pockets of superstars, then what about the quality of the hardware? So what do you think of the balance between the human behavior or image of the actors and actresses and the hardware itself, including design of the hardware?
Well, indeed, it's a very, very delicate balance that we need to strike between the two factors. And so this time around, I think China Film Corporation Group find the best choice, I think. And for example, it was all second and third class, and B or C listed actors in this very film. And even Wu Jing is not the first class, is not the first rated. And so
he's the protagonist of Wolf Warrior 2.
No, he's the protagonist of the Wolf series. But then this time around, Wu Jing intervened and actually put in his own money. So with this lack of funding, actors can play a role. I mean, actors like Wu Jing, who makes money, actually, who has a devotion to this very sci-fi genre film, or who was inspired by this very sci-fi film genre, and can actually inject new force and new life and new funding in this. So that's the balance I think I'm expecting more investors to get involved.
In our previous discussion before you actually joined us, we were talking about the cultural elements of the Wandering Earth, which is of course a landmark success in terms of box office as well as the first of the kind as a wake-up call. So what do you think are the cultural elements that are so unique to ensure the success of its own box office?
Yeah, once again, it's a group or collectivism versus this very individualism. That was the first thing I'd like to highlight at this point. Now, in Wandering Earth is a group of people or multinational, government. Under this very government, people from multi-nations work together. Once again, unlike, for example, High Noon, you've seen this very Cary Grant character working all on himself, that very lone sheriff, charged into town and fighting all the bandits on his own hand. And so, generally speaking, Chinese culture focuses on this very collective effort, right? Collective endeavor, and work with, in collaboration with multiple nations. This is the Chinese vision. And so secondly, I would say Wandering Earth also offered this very great vision for international cooperation. Like President Xi's vision, it's supposed to be a community of shared future. If we are, as the planet, face this very mega catalysm, we work together. Unlike that in the United States, as they work on themselves.
This guy goes back to the idea of a Belt and Road Initiative, talking about the common community or shared future. So what do you think of the idea that in the Hollywood blockbuster, you would always have a superhero to save the whole Earth, but the whole community of our mankind join hand to escape collectively? That's what he talked about. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree with Professor Tan. And in addition, I think there's another cultural element which this film stresses, which is the concept of home in this film. Because in Hollywood blockbusters, we often see that men built spaceships into space to explore. But here we can see that mankind did not abandon our home, did not abandon our motherland, but take our Mother Earth into the space.
Yeah, I'd like to follow Aina's words. Take, for example, the 2009 film 2012. That's sci-fi. Once again, that's sci-fi. It's all about this one hero fighting for his own family and for his own community, and he escaped. It's basically an endless, is a journey of flight. Here in Wandering Earth, it's a journey of flight and also fight. Together we fight. And then lastly, I would say that Hollywood also depends on this very individual hero who didn't know until that very moment comes. Oh, I'm the hero and I'm going to fight for myself instead of this very general community at large. And so in 2012, it's the guy fighting for his son, and then eventually they were kind of joined in that very arc without taking the Earth. It is all about an arc that carries the rich people, the privileged people into a safer haven and leaving behind the Earth.
But I'm afraid this discourse on collectivism goes against the traditional public perception of what is good, what works in a good movie or in a good narrative. For example, it's always about the story of a family or of a few individuals, their love stories, their tragedy, that would matter more in persuading the audience, look, this is a good story. If you only talk about a group of people without featuring a single individual, like what Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise perform and their presentation in the Hollywood blockbusters, you would have a blurry picture about what is going on.
No, I beg to differ. In Wandering Earth, there is also a sideline plot, which is the Wu Jing versus his father character, the two Wus, Wu Mengda and Wu Jing character. It's about the father and son who used to actually fight against each other. But then in the film, it's all about the reconciliation of the father and son, with Wu Jing dying almost at the very end, charging into Jupiter. He bids farewell, but then there was also a handshake across the universe. Making peace with the father and making peace with this very parental generation and perhaps humanity, in this sense, and to shake hands, to make peace, and to be, in a sense, back again with this very notion of the son and the father, which is supposed to be fundamental dynamics in this very picture, I think.
What do you think of the father-son relationship?
I think this father-son relationship also shows our unique Chinese culture element. For example, the concept of sacrifice. In the end, Wu Jing's character just sacrificed himself completely with the space station. But in the Hollywood films, it is very rare to see a superhero really sacrifice himself. He will succeed at last.
Agreed.
But what about this debate, the movie Wandering Earth smacks of a geopolitical rivalry. For example, in the space station, you only saw a Russian guy instead of an American astronaut joining hand with the Chinese peers. Do you think this is a tool against others of the P5 at the UN Security Council?
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, it is, because we do actually involve the Russians and also the people of multiple color skins in the film. You can see, I mean, it is supposed to be people from multiple nations working under the leadership of this united government, right? And so it is about working in a collaborative manner. Of course, I mean, we don't see the flag of the U.S. I mean, that's an exception. But then, if you think about the rise of superpowers back in, I mean, the 1990s, think about that film called the Air Force One. I mean, we are also excluded. I mean, it was the United States president leading this very United Nations, including Russian, fighting against these very aliens invading the Earth. And we, China, one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations, were not included.
Well, part of the success of Wandering Earth actually comes from a man called Liu Cixin, the playwright. Now, what do you make of his career development, the trajectory? Anything that's special about his success? He's the author of many similar books on science fiction.
Yes, Liu Cixin himself was actually, before, he worked in a power factory. He was a worker at a power factory, but he developed the science fiction through his part-time. And after that, he has won the Hugo Award, which is considered as a Nobel Prize for sci-fi literature in the West. And his book, 3 Bodies, have become one of the best-selling books.
What is his philosophy about human individuals, the doomsday of the world? Given the broad context of climate change and global warming, people have developed a sense of, look, this is the last day of the end of the world, Titanic, and so on and so forth. We have got a strong sense of urgency and crisis. What is his basic philosophy, or is he fundamentally very pessimistic about the future of our world?
I think he is. His rise and his evolution as a writer actually begins with his Cultural Revolutionary period experience. He was born in the early 1960s, and then grew up and spent his formative years during the chaotic years in Chinese history, where you can see the so-called jungle law prevailed. And so in the 3 Body Problem trilogies, he actually was very much in favor of this I would say, very poor theory called the Black Jungle theory, which advocates the idea of social Darwinism. I mean, if you are the best of the best, the best and brightest,
of the fittest in the Black Forest.
Yeah, you survive, and then you leave behind those who are not, who are inferior to you. And so the rise of Liu Cixin also, in a sense, represents the rise of China, perhaps. In that sense, I'm so critical of his work that leaves behind the large majority and leaving only the 3%. I mean, we talk about this, I mean, the 3%. I mean, the people who are supposed to be rich and privileged. And so Liu Cixin's work is criticized. And this young director, Guo Fan, actually deviates so very much in this very film, in discarding some of these very negative ideas for example, in terms of this very superior race should be the leader, and also those who are not supposed to be leave this very disaster got to be killed. In the book, 5,000 people were executed before they decide whether we need a spaceship or we need to bring along the Earth, I mean the globe, with us. And so survival of the fittest is not supposed to be, I mean, has no place in this very film. And that's why I criticized the author. And so his rise needs to be carefully scrutinized in order to highlight some of these issues that you pointed out. For example, climate change, right? The deteriorating environment on our planet Earth. His idea is all flight.
We are old enough to remember the success of many other films produced and directed by Feng Xiaogang, for example. These movies are called Happy New Year movies, 贺岁片. But nowhere could we find them. Nowhere could we find Feng Xiaogang any longer. Is that because of Cui Yongyuan, my former colleague, who were so critical of the the flawed contracts in the movie industry, particularly in terms of the skyrocketing salaries of the superstars. I mean, much of the budget went to the pockets of the most famous movie stars instead of being spent on the movie itself. So what do you think of other options on the table instead of young movies such as The Wandering Earth?
Actually, what Feng Xiaogang's films are comedies. This year, the two comedies, the Crazy Alien and the Pigmas, were also doing quite well. They ranked second and third in the box office at present. So Cui Yongyuan may have affected Feng Xiaogang because Feng Xiaogang was actually making a New Year film, Mobile Phone 2. But due to this conflict, he probably have postponed this production.
Very much like Fanghua, which was postponed. It doesn't mean it would not be released.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I would once again agree with Professor Jin that that very episode did a heavy blow to the Chinese film industry this year around. And back in the past, we all attribute Feng Xiaogang to this very rise of the New Year celebration genre, which proves to be a major contribution to Chinese film industry ever since the 1990s. And still, Feng Xiaogang actually set up a new milestone in creating new genre movie. For example, back in 2007, he actually came up with a war film, see, The Assembly, Jijiehao being the New Year celebrating film. And this time around, I think the Chinese filmmakers step in the footstep, following his footstep by creating new genres. And so what I see right now, this New Year celebrating movie scene is now characterized by a diversity, diversifying this very scene with, like Professor Jin said, comedy, right? Urban melodrama, and also sci-fi films.
We've been talking about the impact of Hollywood blockbusters on their Chinese counterparts or equivalents. So in terms of commercialization and industrialization of movie as a profession, maybe we have a lot to learn from, first of all, our neighboring country of South Korea. A lot say, look, when they watch South Korean television drama or movies at home video, they feel ashamed of the Chinese homegrown ones because we have such a big gap and distance between the Chinese movie industry and that in South Korea. Do you agree that we have a lot to do to catch up with the South Koreans in the first place?
I believe that maybe 10 years ago we were far behind, but nowadays I think Chinese TV dramas have done tremendous well, especially like the Yanxi Palace, which was the most Googled TV drama in 2018 all over the world.
Or even The Legend of Zhenhuan, right?
Yeah,
all these great palace TV dramas.
What do you make of the factor of demographic changes? These days, China is aging, and young people in the third and the fourth tier cities might form the bulk of the major audience in our theaters. Do you see such a sea change in the demographic map?
Well, see, the demographic change plays a key role in promoting and also boosting Chinese box office success, these blockbuster hits. I mean, think about, right, these people, the millennium, the Chinese millennials. These guys are actually all around in second and fourth tier cities. These are the people with disposable money right now.
But excuse me, they fall into the category of low-income families. However, ironically, blockbusters like Wandering Earth and similarly others are very expensive in terms of the box office. How can they live up to the rising standards commercially?
Well, see,
that could be a major problem.
Yeah, it is a problem. But then think about these e-commerce platforms, and think about some of these like e-platforms that offers this very tuangou, this collective marketing of selling, and these people can make use of these advantages offered by these e-commerce
platforms. But I'm afraid authorities in the movie industry have ordered, given clear instruction not to give subsidies to movie tickets, right? this year around?
No. Subsidies are different. Subsidies are for this very collective funding for example, for future filmmakers and future film productions. I mean, the Film Bureau actually would allocate a certain amount from this box office revenue to this very funding in order to help. And that funding would be allocated to these smaller theaters so that they can lower the ticket price.
Excuse me, you are barking at the wrong tree, perhaps. I was thinking about the success of Wolf Warrior 2.
Right.
On the third stage of its success, people found out that most of the seats were empty in the cinema, despite the impressive figure of the box office. Therefore, they came to the conclusion that it's a result of a subsidy. I mean, tickets were bought by different downweight units, employers, to create the impression of being patriotic, and to be politically correct, for example. Do you think such things would happen to movies like Wandering Earth to show our national pride?
No, I don't think
you don't think so?
I don't think this phenomenon will happen.
There are some skeptical and cynical people who are so critical of this phenomenon.
But I agree with you that this year the government has withdrawn the subsidy to the movie tickets, which has increased about 15% compared with previous year. Some people said it might be the reason. Several days after release of New Year films, there are already some internet sites where you can download this those films.
Right? Yeah. These are pirated films. Right?
Yeah. Maybe because of, as Mr. Yang just mentioned, because of the young people, they do not have so much money to watch all of those films in the theater, so they probably will choose the...
Well, today is an exception. Perhaps this is a Valentine's Day. Whatever the price of the tickets, boys would have to be gentlemen, right? Yes. But thank you so much for being part of this meaningful discussion about the success of this Chinese sci-fi blockbuster, The Wandering Earth. That might be the only the beginning of a long journey to follow Hollywood. That's the good news for President Donald Trump. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.